sometimes we overlook details that are extremely important, uh, especially when it comes to the value sets that were established by Islam. Now, let's be clear here. Muhammad is not, to me, a person with a revealed text. Muhammad is indeed a person who reflected on his time's thinking and delivered somehow a form of understanding of life, of things, as it was understood back then. So, by understanding Muhammad and Islam, we're understanding a whole era of how people thought about things, how they perceived things, and how they tried to explain and interpret things. Now, when we get to the issue of values, we do always have issues related of what makes things right or wrong. Is it the usefulness of something, an act? Is it David Hume approach to what is right and what is wrong? Is it Kant who thinks that there is some kind of imperative, kind of categorical, somehow approach to value and what is right and what is wrong and why we do them? Or is it something else? Muhammad, in fact, came up with a new interpretation of values. Again, I need to repeat here, I am not talking about Muhammad who is perceived as somebody with a revealed text, that is the Quran. I'm talking about Muhammad who really expressed the understanding of his era with regard to values, for example. So, one of the things that Muhammad really didn't do is that he never mentioned that things are right or wrong. What he established at that time, that is 1500 years ago, is the motives. We have a tradition that goes back to Muhammad that says, supposed it goes back to him. It's recorded or related to him from one person only, which call it in Islamic scholarly traditions gharib. But it doesn't matter here. Anyway, the story goes to him via Umar ibn Khattab, one of his companions, and this tradition says the following. إنما الأعمال بالنيات, which means that everything is based on the motives that drive it. So, if somebody's migrate from one place to another in order to seek some heavenly or godly or divinely thing, then that migration will be counted as an act toward God. However, if somebody migrate for wealth or for a woman, then his migration will count as an act toward those things. That means wealth or a woman. Now, what is really surprising about this approach of Muhammad is that he did not dismiss the other kind of motives. He didn't outlaw them. He didn't say they were bad or unreasonable or, evil. No. He said those will be counted against that thing, that wealth or that woman or that something like that. But if the migration is for God, then it's God who will reward it. That's basically what we learn. So, if you go migrate or do something for God, then God will reward you. But if you do something for wealth, or your reward will be probably money or a woman to marry or something like that. It's somehow an earthly reward versus a reward coming from God. Now, at these two levels, divinely kind of a divine reward or a worldly reward, the issue here is that Muhammad doesn't say that the other rewards are bad or evil. He said that they are just different. They are not for God. So, in other words, Muhammad did not establish a set of value that said this is good and this is bad. He said just that this one is for God and the other one are for something else. Now here comes a serious issue, is that for Muhammad and at that time, they needed really a set of value. Muhammad did not intervene to create a new set of values. He did not tell them what is right or what is wrong. He told them only that you need basically to dedicate your acts to God versus dedicating them to some kind of wealth or women or for any kind of other pursuit. That's something on the side, but there is the other divine pursuit, which is doing things for God. So here for Muhammad, even though he uses the motives like Kant did, and actually Christianity also established also the idea of motives, Muhammad didn't say that there were some motives that were good and other that were not. He did not say that. What Muhammad said was that this motive will lead to God, this motive will lead to an earthly reward. Now, the point here, which will become really crucial in terms of understanding the sets of values that Islam, or basically that era, established, is we should live in a world with various sets of values. One of them is God. The other ones are other kind of sets or other values. And there is an important here, because even later on in a lot of tradition and even in the Quran, Muhammad doesn't say clearly that something is good in itself. He doesn't use that word. What he says is, for example, if you kill one person, it's like killing, if you kill one person not rightly, not following the right way, because you are not dedicating it to God, then it's like killing the whole humanity. It's like killing the whole humankind. Which is kind of, it's not a judgment. There is no value here, says. It's just saying that if you kill one person that you were not supposed to kill, supposed to kill here means that if it's not dedicated to God. So, if it's not a death to defend, for example, God or your faith or something like that, any other killing will be considered as unlawful somehow, and it will be considered as if you killed the whole mankind. So here Muhammad is not saying this is good and that one is wrong. He's saying that either you kill and dedicate your action to God, which will make you basically a person close to God because you are doing things right according to God's book, or you can do things that are for other reason, for other purposes, and that same act will become now illegal, and in fact it will equal killing the whole mankind. Which is here, again, it's important because there is no values here. Muhammad is not saying this is the right way and this is the wrong way. He's saying that if it's not for God, then it's like killing the whole mankind. Killing one person equals killing humanity in its entirety. So these are issue. Muhammad also doesn't issue any statement about doing things or acts that make them right or good in themselves. There is no good in itself. Even if the motive is good, it doesn't make them good. In other words, when you reflect on the Kantian approach to values and ethics, you can't find it here in Islam. It's not because your motives are good that the acts are good. No. The motives should be dedicated to God in order to be appreciated or praised by God. That's all. It doesn't say they are good. So, let's take a simple example here. A person goes out. I mean, we do have these kind of example that come when we talk about Kant and about Hume, but let's take them in a different direction here because we need to put a focus on the motive. So, somebody have or gone into a war, and here is very important. He goes to a war and he starts shooting. Now, shooting in itself is a criminal act. What makes it not a criminal act in a Kantian kind of approach will be if you shoot because, I don't know, values are good, you are defending your country, you are defending your faith, you are defending something else. There are things of motives that are good that make your act good. Now, for David Hume, it's useful. I mean, you do things because they serve you, they serve humanity, they serve many things, and that makes them really rationally useful to many other parts of the world. In Islam, there is the act that you do, even if the motive is good, doesn't return and make the act itself good. The act itself, the action of killing, remains the same, no matter what the motive is. What changes here is that your motive or your intention to dedicate that act either to God or to somebody else. So, the action itself does not change, is not impacted. We are not, or Muhammad, at least the way he conceived the whole thing, he didn't conceive it in order to get some kind of a return value that makes that act good. Muhammad doesn't try that. That act is gonna remain neutral from the beginning to the end. What changes only is one thing: your intention. Now you think about intention, so what does it mean? I will give you an example here for the intention on how valuable, but it's actually, it's almost a form of hypocrisy somehow in terms of telling yourself. So, you all know that, or at least some of you know, that Muslims pray 5 times a day. Now, the prayer itself, it's an act, right? It's a physical action. It's a prostration. If you do some acts, you get down, etc. Those are physical kind of movement that you make. So, what does make them part of a religious ritual, other than the physical movement? What makes them valid is your intention. So before you go to prayer, you say, according to some school, you need even to say, to voice it, and say, this prayer is intended for God, and it's the second prayer, for example, or the third prayer of the day. And you say it. So, what happens here is that that physical movement at that point changes from being a simple physical movement, or a sport actually, of going up and down. It becomes a ritual, a religious ritual that you are performing. It's just that intention at the beginning. It should be prior to the action. So you cannot intend while doing it. No, it should be prior. Before you start, you need to voice out your intention. Now, you wonder here, I mean, suppose that these people really believe that there is a God, and some of them do believe that there is a God in the sky that is watching. You wonder, like, does this God know? Doesn't he know? I mean, it's obvious. If you are praying for him 5 times a day, doing all the ritual, doing all the activity, of course he knows it's for him. No. according to the tradition for the most Islamic religious schools say that you need to specify your intention before you do the act. Here, it's actually shifting the most important part of that action, of that physical action, from God or any set of values to you. Actually, we become the one who create the value of our action. So it's really kind of almost, I don't know, it's almost like a vicious circle of, you have a prophet who tells you to do some action or movement. But then, when you do those movements, they are worthless unless you yourself say why you are doing them. And then you create a new kind of dedication, not value. It doesn't make them valuable or good. Prayer is not considered to be good. Prayer is, for example, an act that you do because God is asking you to do it. So, for Muhammad and for Islam, actually, I will say probably Islam is more accurate because Muhammad is not the only one who created this whole kind of set of understanding and conception of values. It's the whole tradition altogether that created him. So, according to this tradition, there are no values, there are no intrinsic or inherent values in our acts or actions. Nothing. There is nothing. The only thing that we can do is to dedicate our action to this external being that is God or Allah. So we are really playing at the level of the dedication only. Acts, performance of anything, ritual, have no values in themselves. Zero, none. The only thing that we can do is to intend them or to dedicate them to God. Same for example, fasting. You know, fasting is a 30 days or 29 to 30 days. Now, according to most religious schools, you need to intend before every day that you are dedicating the fasting of the next day to God. It's stupid. I mean, if this guy up there, if he exists, he knows what you are doing. Yet, for these scholarly kind of schools, they think that no, you should do it, you should say it before the beginning of that fasting of each and every day. Oh God, I intend the fasting of next day to you. So here, what are we doing here? We are taking an act. It's not a movement like prayers, it's an act or a practice that you do for 30 days, 29 to 30 days. You fast from sunrise to sunset. But that fasting is not valid until you say literally before starting the fast every day that this fasting is intended or dedicated to God. Now here what I am trying to say is that the act of fasting does not get a new value to it. It's still the same. It's the same action or the same kind of fasting. It doesn't change. What changes is only that you are dedicating it to God. So values in Islam is dedication. Value is not something in the act or that you can give to the act. None. You never give to the act or action that you do any value at any point. There is no actually putting in it. So here what we can probably summarize this whole story about values when we compare it to a Kantian kind of approach is that we can use the idea of motives in a different way. Motives do not necessarily go back to the act or the action and give it value. No, in Islam, motives do not change the quiddity of the action. They don't. The motive are useful only in creating a certain motive or a certain dedication or intention that goes straight, it should be specified to God. So, last thing I need to say here is that acts or action do not have any value in them. We cannot give them value either. And even when we do them with good intention, we do not change their internal kind of value. The only thing that we can change in Islam is how we dedicate them. So, if we want to look at it from a progressive kind of approach to this whole thing, is that we are the one who create the value by dedicating it. So, if somebody can switch or shift this interest from God to something else, so basically, if tomorrow people will say, will take a set of values and say, listen, from now on we are gonna do these action 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. to or dedicate them to the protection of our nation, or to the protection of our people, or to the protection of something like that. That is a valid, basically, set of value that you can create yourself. So every person can create really a new set of values. So this is basically what I want to say. I don't think it's a full response, but actually I was kind of uneasy with the idea that Kant believed that by having a good motive, you can make a good act. A good will make a good act. No, not necessarily. In Islam, a good will doesn't make a good act. A good will make it, even the word good is actually not, doesn't exist in Islam. A will that is intended or dedicated to God, make that act valid. So here, validation is the central point of Islamic values. Validation. There is nothing moral there. There is only validation. Who validates what you do and how you validate what you do. So, if you could go back, for example, to Moses, for example. Moses, somebody who started his professional career as a killer. He killed somebody, he killed an Egyptian. Okay. Now, that killing, it's true, it established the career of Moses, unfortunately, because that's the first time we hear about him, other than all of those stories before that. But after that, what? He killed an Egyptian, supposedly, to defend his other nation, who we don't know if they really existed and lived in Egypt or not. But it doesn't matter now here. We are talking about that act. Killing an Egyptian. How do we perceive that act? At that time, there were no set of values. Supposedly, God didn't reveal himself to Moses yet, so there is nothing. Moses basically killed somebody. He's a killer. He's a criminal there. Now, we do understand from later, the way stories presented to us, he was defending other Hebrews or Israelites from the suffering inflicted on them by Egyptian. And he intervened and he pushed this Egyptian guard, and the guard died, something like that. So, now, as I said, at that time, God didn't reveal himself to Moses yet. So there is no set of values of what is good and what is bad. How did Moses deal with it? How did he think of himself? If we want to really think of the set of value from a Christian standpoint, Moses was at that point a criminal. Not in Islam. In Islam, if you think of the same story, how it's presented to us, no. For Muslim, we believe also of the same kind of event. But it was for Moses, it was to defend his own people. And the people at that time considered by Islam right also, according to our tradition. Therefore, the act, it doesn't have to be good, the act is right. It was dedicated to God and to the defense of his own people. So, without needing any values there, we can say that Moses did the right thing. And this is where the story really comes handy in terms of justifying things or how you can do them. So, for Moses, if he intended that act to defend his own people, then it is right. He does not need to have a set of value to tell him whether what he did was right or wrong. He does not need that. What he needs only is to do that act in order to do or defend or something like that. And that's what we understand. So for us Muslim, we understand that story this way. Because at that time there were no values. No really values. God didn't yet reveal himself to Moses. So it's Moses who will be deciding what is right and what is wrong. And we understand that Moses at that time decided it is right because he did it to the dedication, or the motive was to defend his own people. So we can see from this example how the Islamic approach to values shifts the center of the creation of values to people themselves. It's true, we dedicate it to God, but actually we do it. Nobody else. So, in other words, if you can say like, hey, I don't know anything stupid that you can make and say, okay, my intention is really to defend God or to... It works. Islam will not reject that. At least the structure of our values will work well with that. Because you can say like, anything you can do, even if it sounds to you stupid or to other people stupid. Still, you can say, well, I did it to defend my faith, or to defend God, or to defend this. And then God is not gonna tell you, oh, that's terrible, because there is no set of value. There is no good and evil in this set of values. It will say, okay, if you intended it to me, then God will say, I mean, if you did intend this act for me, then I'm fine with it. I take it. And then you feel fine too, because you know that it wasn't really to make money. It wasn't because you were after a woman or after wealth or after a house. No, you did it supposedly because you did it for God. So this is really very important in terms of creating values in Islam, and that's why it's still today very controversial, because a lot of Western people think, and all the time actually say, oh, why can't Muslims tell each other that this is not good, you cannot do this or you cannot do that? Why? We don't need anybody to tell us what's good and what's right. We tell ourselves what's good and what's right. By telling ourselves we are going to do this for God. So it's really irrelevant what people think of how they can impose that some form of Greek approach to values by having somebody on top of pedestal or somewhere who will be disbursing basically information and value to people. We don't have that in Islam. Nobody disburses values. We do create them by dedicating our action to something. Thank you for listening.